Well, we are in the midst of the Christian calendar of season called Lent. It is the 40 days leading up to Jesus on the cross and his subsequent resurrection. And if you do the math, you realize it's more than 40 days. But usually, traditionally, they don't count the Sundays in Lent, so that it does end up equaling the 40 days. It starts on Ash Wednesday, which we started Wednesday. Did any of you get a chance to participate in that? Whether that be Wednesday or some other day, all three of you, great. That's wonderful. Hopefully somebody else participated, but we got YouTube views. I could look to see what I actually did. So, but that's where we officially started the series. We're calling it "Don't Waste Your Wilderness." I kind of mentioned this in another teaching somewhere, just a phrase that kind of stuck out to me, and especially thinking about the journey that I've heard from many of you are going through, including myself, which feels very much like a wilderness. And we talked a lot about that in Ezekiel. And this is a little bit different. Lent is a time where we have serious reflection of the journey to the cross, and I feel like that's what we've been doing all of 2022 so far, especially with the book of Ezekiel. It kind of demands that. And so with this, the way that I want to go with this series is it doesn't mean that we're going to continue just to seriously reflect on the wilderness all the time. However, we are going to think about the journey and not the destination, because it's easy to think when you're in the wilderness, I can't wait to get out of this. And at the same time, we miss so much within it. And that said, we still need to leave Egypt, which is what we talked about on Wednesday. There's a time to leave Egypt because Egypt was a place of slavery, which we're going to talk about a lot today. And in fact, this whole series, we're basically going to be journeying through the book of Exodus and a little bit of Numbers. That's going to be a lot of the Lenten series. We will connect it to Jesus, don't worry. But it's the kind of big story of the Jewish people, especially when you're talking about the journey in the wilderness. This is the first story that comes to mind for them, and I think there's some great truths in it for us. And this is inspired. There's an old prophet of mine. I consider him a mentor. He wrote a great book a few years back. If you are interested in it, because I've been very inspired by it over the years. The book is called "Leaving Egypt" by Chuck DeGroat. He's professor over at Western Seminary in Holland, but I also took a couple of classes with him and had many, many conversations with him. But it's a tremendous book, and a lot of the inspiration for the series comes from that, but and many other things. But I hope this is an encouragement to you. It's going to be a challenge in some ways, but I hope more of it's encouragement and inspiration to not only understand what God is like in the midst of this journey in the wilderness, but of the promises he continues to proclaim to us in the midst of it, and to live into this hope in our lives. So if you have Bibles, turn to Exodus chapter 6. It's the second book of the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, right at the beginning. And we're going to just read verses 6 to 9 this morning. I'll be reading from the NIV this morning, but Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 to 9. And God is talking to a man by the name of Moses in this text. You might have heard of him. He says, "Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord." Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Let's pray together. God, I pray, as I do every week, and I pray it again, that let my words be your words. Let them flow through me to touch each person listening online, here in person, in a unique way, in only the way that you can. May you remove the blockades, obstacles, blinders, whatever it is that gets in the way from hearing your voice. God, I pray that we would hear you clearly today in a fresh way. I pray for those who are listening, even for the first time, and God, that they would see you in a light that shows how amazing you are, how much you love us and pursue us, and God, the hope and the new identity that you have for us, that you've been saying to us from the very beginning. In the name of Jesus, and everybody said, amen. Well, today we're talking about Moses. He's a pretty important dude in the biblical story. I don't know if that's a term we use biblically, dude, but that's what I'm going to call him. That's the good old youth pastor in me. He's a pretty critical dude in the story of the Bible. Um, Moses was a person that called out injustice when he saw it. If you know the story of Moses, it's an interesting one. He is an Israelite, but there was a little thing that happened when they were, because the Israelites were in slavery to the Egyptians for 400 years. At least that's what it says in the scriptures. Who knows exactly how long that is, but it's a long time. And Pharaoh got a little jealous of the Israelite people as they were growing in number, thinking they were a threat to his country. And so he decided to pass a little law. The law was, let's kill every newborn Israelite boy. That was the law that he passed. Pretty awesome law, right? Yeah. So, yeah, they're all freaking out at the Israelites. And so little clever mother of Moses decides to put him in a little basket, throw him in the Nile River, and float him on down. And in the story, Pharaoh's daughter picks up the basket and raises Moses as her own. So Moses, as Israelite, gets spared from the law that the Pharaoh passed, who is the ruler of Egypt, who's known as a god, and is in his own household, getting raised. And then later on, as he became an adult, he saw his own people in slavery to Egypt, and that's the whole story of the Exodus, and that's where we find ourselves in. And he was a person that always called out the dignity of those who were enslaved. And you'll know also that he wasn't a saint. And I'll talk about that later as well, because when we talk about Moses, we just kind of put him on a pedestal. We think maybe for the old school people that still watch the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, we think Charlton Heston's Moses. Yeah, I don't know if Moses talks like that, although that's a pretty cool voice. But Moses wasn't a saint either. But yet he was still someone that called out the injustices that he saw. He believed in the dignity of all people, and more importantly, he cast a vision of hope for people that were enslaved. And we saw in this text, and that's what we're going to talk about today, is how they didn't believe him. And we'll talk about why that is, because I think a lot of ways we can relate to that. I don't know if you've ever felt passionate about something, and you're trying to tell people and persuade them to believe you, and they just yeah, whatever. I feel like that every day. But that's Moses. That happened to Moses. I mean, if you think about it, all the Israelites knew for generations upon generation is slavery. They have no free will. They are at the mercy of another empire. They can only do what they're told to do, and if they choose not to do that, then there's a pretty easy punishment. They either get killed, they get tortured, or some other severe punishment that happens to them, or all the above. That is the life of an Israelite at this time. And so when someone comes up to you and says, oh, by the way, you're not going to be in slavery to Egypt anymore. I mean, especially if it's going on for 400 years. You're like, yeah, right. I mean, are you really going to believe him? Because how many times has people tried to give you hope in the midst of such a long time of difficulty, or what seems like a long time, and you're just like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. And that's what Moses was going through. So most of you know that story. What's interesting, in the Hebrew Bible, when we talk about names, we talked about this before, names mean something in the Bible. The meaning of a name is part of their identity. The name Moses literally means drawn out, which is really interesting because he's drawn out of the Nile River, right? But what's more interesting is not just that he's drawn out of the Nile, but he's being drawn out to draw out the Israelites from slavery to Egypt. Now, they don't really believe this yet or know this for sure, but already in Moses' name himself, it's setting us up for this part of the story. I mean, Moses constantly kept inviting this oppressed, enslaved, and tortured people, his own people, to freedom and life, and they didn't listen because it's just so ridiculous to believe. And it's in that situation, I don't know what you feel like, but I think from many of the stories I've heard lately, let's say the last month and a half, I don't know if you've ever felt this way. I'm going to guess that most of you probably have at some point, or some of you now, because I know some of the stories. Have you ever been in a moment that's really felt so hopeless and so difficult that you think, I'm never going to get out of this? Have you ever felt that way before? Okay, I got some nods. Good. Okay, so I'm not talking to myself today. Yeah, I mean, I felt that way the last couple years, actually, with my own personal health. I just feel like it's never going to go away. I feel that way about my student loan debt, that it's never going to go away, right? I could never be free from it. And there's other many situations I've heard in the last 6 weeks where it just seems like it's so overwhelming and we're never going to get out of it. There's never going to be a break. Things just constantly fall on the wrong side of life. I think most of you know what I'm talking about. Imagine a Moses coming to you and saying, hey, I just want to let you know that God has a vision for your life. And it's not going to be this. Just wait and see. I mean, you really going to believe that? Oh, and by the way, the journey's not going to be easy with that. But you won't have to live to this slavery anymore. I mean, it's a hard sell. And that's what Moses is called to do. I mean, would you actually believe someone that came to you and said that? That said, I don't know if you've thought about this. Have you ever had a Moses in your life? A person who called out injustice on your behalf? A person who proclaimed your dignity among people where they would rather mock you? For those who are younger, and it still happens as adults too. We're just a little more sly about it. But all the time when I was at school, I remember like when we're in a classroom before the bell rings or in the cafeteria, and a group of friends get together. They see someone walk across the room, and it doesn't matter what it is. They're going to pick on something, whether that someone did something or they're wearing the wrong clothes, they look the wrong way, and they start whispering and giggling to each other. And they're trying to get everyone in to join in to mock them. You know what I'm talking about? Moses is the kind of person that calls that out for what it is. Moses is the kind of person that stands up and stops it, chooses not to laugh at the crowd and says, I think that's not really fair. That's not very nice to that person. That's what Moses does. And you can recognize really quickly when you start to be that kind of person, or that kind of person, that's not the best place to be. It's a hard place to be, right? But at the same time, a Moses is the type of person who sees a vision about yourself that maybe you don't even believe. That's good. Do you have someone like that in your life? Who says things about you that you're just like, yeah, you're being a little too nice. You don't know what you're talking about. But they just insist on that. For me, I've had many Moses in my life. The first Moses I would say that I remember in this journey with Jesus was my first youth pastor, Bob Nicholson. I got his picture. There he is with his wife, Sarah. And I didn't tell Bob I used his picture. I just pulled it off Facebook. I figured it was all right. So I'll ask him later. He won't mind. He's pretty upfront about it. Some of you have heard my story about when I became a Christian. I was 17 years old. I hated Christians growing up. Bob was my first youth pastor. It was the first youth group I went to. That's where I became a Christian, where he was. And I tell him, I don't even know what he was saying in that teaching he was doing. I just remember what he said at the end, which was, if you want Jesus to be the center of your life and give your life to him, just come up front here. That's all I remember hearing. And but Bob, after that, was the critical part. It wasn't just when he was up front there. It was what he did after that moment, which was he met with me like every few weeks, one-on-one, to walk through like basic practices of faith to help me read the Bible and to pray with me and to help me understand what it looks like to live like a Christian, and walk through that together. Walking through the scriptures with me. He was one of my biggest cheerleaders. He cheered me on, especially when I was living differently in a good way. He would call that stuff out. And then something strange really happened in the first few months that we knew each other. He started asking me to go with him to retreats that he would speak at, like youth retreats. He'd go get invited to these youth retreats, some weekends here, and he would invite me to come along. And some of these retreats were like in other states, but he just said, hey, you want to come along with me for the weekend and just sing a song and share your testimony is what he'd asked me to do. So I sang a song, and I don't even remember what song it was. I was trying to remember what it was. I couldn't remember. But I shared my testimony, and you can imagine, you can imagine now, but I didn't know back then, it'd take about 5 minutes, Mike, and share your testimony, and it ended up being 20 minutes. And yeah, it was great. He was so patient with me. It seems like a problem I still have sometimes, but what was interesting is this time of my life, I thought that I was a total loser. In fact, the moment up to becoming a Christian, that's really what I thought of myself. And I was at the brink of saying, this life isn't even worth living anymore. And for those of you that know my story, I'm not going to get too far into that, but I really thought I was a total loser. I had nothing to live for. My life was a continuation of failures. I wasn't good enough for anything or anyone. That was what I thought about myself then. And yet Bob kept inviting me to these retreats and kept inviting me to speak and sing a song, share my testimony and sing a song. And a crazy thing happened during that time. People actually listened to me. I know it's hard to believe that, but people listened to what I had to say. I was blown away. Why would you want to? And then, they listened to me ramble for 20 minutes and not get upset. Like, what is happening here? Like, usually I talk for a minute and people are just walk away, but not then. I don't know what was going on. And Bob would never, ever stop telling me, hey, dude, people want to hear what you have to say. Your story means something. Your story is a testimony to God working in lives that seem impossible. And I'm just like, I didn't feel that way, but that's what he kept telling me. And then he dropped the bomb on me a few months in, about 4 months in to this journey. He said, Mike, I'm going to tell you something and you're not going to believe me. I believe you're supposed to be a pastor. I laughed at him the first time he told me that. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm like, oh man, no. I was gonna be a chiropractor. I was really excited about that. I still love chiropractic medicine. I watch chiropractic videos on YouTube all the time, so that's how I'll tell you how obsessed I am with it. I am a crack addict. It's true. I'm sorry. I love hearing the pops. Anyway, but it's true, man. I am. But yeah, when he told me this, it just really wigged me out. I'm like, really? No. And so he started telling me things that were qualities of a pastor, and he just would keep inviting me to do the things that pastors would do. I didn't really know that he was doing that all the time. I wasn't that smart back then. Maybe I'm not now, but he kept doing that, and I started to believe it until not too much longer. 3 months after that moment, I really heard a sound call from God saying, yeah, this is what I want you to be. And here I am, believe it or not. Okay, look at you. That wasn't the effect I was looking for, but I say that because we all need Moseses in our lives. We do. And I think about so many times how we don't have them present, and this is where the coin gets flipped, maybe they're there and we choose to not listen to them because we've been enslaved to our situation, our circumstances, and whatever we're going through for so long that we never think we can get out of it. So no matter what someone says, it's not I'm not trying to say Moses are positive Pams all the time, all right? That's not what I'm saying. A person who really believes something better about your life, about your identity than what you think about yourself. We just choose not to listen to them because we have had this reality for so long that's been the wilderness that there can't possibly be another alternative. And so the question, is maybe if you are in that place, maybe Moses are already showing up in your lives. And maybe this time when you hear those kind of things, and this is what it's so funny. This is what Bob told me because I was reading stuff in the Bible. I'm like, I do not believe this about myself. And he said this. This is so crazy. He said, just act like it's true and see what happens. And I'm like, is that fake? But that wasn't fake. He was talking about an identity that God had already placed upon me, that he called out in me. He was calling that out. I didn't believe him. So he said, well, just act like it's true. If this were really true, how would your life change? And I'm like, and I had nothing to lose. I was like, well, I don't have anything else to live for. I might as well try it. And I did. And lo and behold, guess what happened? My life started getting transformed. I believed it. And it's weird because we think so many times about believing being in our head all the time that's the first step. I got to believe it here first before I can actually do it. And a Jewish person would tell you it's a both and. Because sometimes you have to walk into things to actually believe it. Like, I don't believe this about myself. But as I'm walking into this, and when someone else believes, when Moses calls this out in me, then something is changing within me. God can work that way. God is constantly calling his people to the identity he said from the very beginning. This is who you are. Because God doesn't see slaves, my friends. He sees people that he loves. Jim's got the audio Bible. He's getting ahead of me.
I'm checking on you.
Yeah, okay, just checking. He's being a good Berean right now. Yeah, that's good. Thank you, Google, Siri, Bible. But I mean, Moses is calling out those things that God has said from the very beginning. And if you look at verse 9, it says they didn't listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Now, that's a fun little phrase because they're trying to translate specific words in the original language to what this actually means. There's a lot of different words that comes out, but this word discouragement, there's other translations, like the ESV says broken spirit. But in the Hebrew, the word literally, it's actually a couple words put together, literally means shortness of breath. That's what that discouragement word means. Think about that. Now, think about maybe the situations you found yourself in that you would say is wilderness time. And for a lot of people, that's now. Do you feel like sometimes that you're short of breath? Physically and mentally, it's exhausting. You're just so, that's what I feel like right now. Just so exhausted of the constant grind, and your breath is short. Physically for me it's happening, but even mentally that happens as well. That's what they're going through as well. I know it's Bible times, but I'm telling you, they feel the same way you do. The shortness of breath. I want to believe you, Moses, but I just can't muster up the energy to fight this. I can't. That's the hard way. And I just don't have the energy anymore. Because I've fought this in the past, and it just hasn't worked out. And I don't want to revisit that over and over and over again. And yet, you are still enslaved. You hear me? What's amazing is that regardless of how the Israelites feel, God is relentless in telling them who they are. Because again, God doesn't see slaves, he sees a people that he loves. Dignity, because a human being is a masterpiece in God's sight. The human is the pinnacle of God's creation. That's not what the Egyptians are doing, treating them as less than human, as a piece of property for their own pleasure. No, God sees them as people that he loves. So God sees beneath all of their pain, beneath all of the slavery of the circumstances they find themselves in, whether they caused it or not, beneath all the ways they tried to hide all that from people, and says to them that you were lost and I am finding you in the wilderness right now, and I'm going to give you a new vision and a new identity and a new hope for your life. That's what God is like in our wilderness. And it takes a Moses to remind us of that. We need a Moses in our life to tell us that, because friends, you can't walk the journey alone. I don't know if you know that. Whatever you're going through, we sometimes, and I would say Julia probably does this more than me, and I'm not throwing her under the bus, it's just I know that she does, and we talk about it all the time, but it's easy to say, there's a lot of other people that have it harder than we do, which is true. But it doesn't mean that what we're going through isn't difficult. And it's easy to think because we're not, my life is not as difficult as, say, someone in Ukraine right now. That's true. But we need people to walk through those things with us regardless. To not share those things with people is also slavery. We're not designed to carry that alone. Why did God send Moses to the Israelites in the first place? We need someone to remind us in the time that we're in the wilderness of what our identity is. That it's not as a slave to what we think about ourselves, to what other people say about us, the circumstances we find ourselves in, or our failures even. but as God's masterpiece, made in his image, who calls us to an identity he's been calling all along, but it's going to be new to us. That we matter because we exist. To live a flourishing life, to live a free life. Lately, I've had to listen to some Moseses. I would say this time in my life, I'd say the last couple years especially, and maybe you feel the same way, the pandemic has been brutal. It's one of the hardest times I can remember in the last 2 years. I just had a friend of mine who passed away on Wednesday night. More people have passed away than I can remember in the last couple of years. I've never struggled with my personal health as much as I have in these last couple of years. Whether it be my own fault or not, who knows? And at the same time, there are Moseses coming alongside me to remind me who I am. That I am a masterpiece made in God's image. Not only that, but to remind me that regardless of what I think about myself, regardless of what is ailing me or what circumstances I have in my life, I have a Moses that tells me, my God is still working through you in incredible ways. Even if I don't believe it, even if I don't want to listen, even if I'm short of breath. I mean, one of the powerful things about Moses' story is watching him enter into others' brokenness, right? Walking with them and leaving Egypt with them together. That's what Moses does. He doesn't just like preach a sermon from on high and then leave them out hanging dry. He enters into the brokenness with them and walks with them out of Egypt and helps rescue them by God's hand. That's what Moses does. I mean, there's really two questions today that we think about, which the first one I asked, who are the Moseses in your life? And are you listening to them? Do you believe what they say? How they're reminding of who you are, even if you don't believe it? And on the flip side of that coin, maybe for you, you need to ask, who can you be a Moses to? Because we need Moseses in our lives. I witnessed that this week of watching a group of people be a Moses to someone else. I don't know if that's what they thought of it, but that's what was happening. Hearing one of the most gut-wrenching stories I've heard in a long time and watching a group of people come alongside you and say, we got you, we know who you are. This is who you are. We got your back. And we're going to walk with you through it. That's what Moses does. And I can tell you more than ever, there are so many that need a Moses in their life. And they may not listen to you because they've been in slavery for so long to whatever they're going through that they think they can never get out of it, that there's no hope. And yet the story of Scripture over and over again is a God of hope that says, no, you don't have to live this way anymore. There will become a time when all of this stuff that you're going through is no more. I don't know when that's going to be. I mean, Moses didn't promise, roses and warm fuzzies and stuffed animals. I mean, he didn't promise that. I mean, he kind of it's going to be really tough. And Moses had to stand in the gap for them. I mean, he took the brunt of a lot of flack, right? He went up to Pharaoh. He had to go tell Pharaoh, hey, by the way, there's going to be 10 plagues that come upon the nation of Egypt. They weren't too pretty, which it's a really interesting story because basically it was, one, a challenge to all 10 of the major gods of Egypt. It also was like a reversal of the creation narrative. It was like the uncreation narrative. There's all sorts of layers in this, but Moses had to be the person to tell him that, and Moses didn't want to do it. I don't want to be that person. I'm not really good at talking to people. Whatever excuses you want to make. And we also know Moses wasn't a saint. You remember when he killed an Egyptian and buried him in the sand? Hello? That's not really usually what, yeah, Moses, you're awesome. It's not usually something we cheer on, but that's Moses. And yet God called him. God drew out him to help cast a vision into an enslaved people's life. A Moses calls a person by their name. It's not like, hey, you, or hey, waitress or waiter, whatever position that they have. Hey, barista. A Moses calls a person by their name. A Moses calls out the dignity of all people. He doesn't join in on the jokes from others making fun of others. Moses enters the mess of your wilderness and walks with you out of Egypt because God knows we can't walk this journey alone. And think about that as we come to a practice that Jesus institutes with his disciples on Passover, with this bread and cup. I mean, in a lot of ways, and we can connect these things to Jesus as well, but you think about the bread that he took, and this is a meal that they eat every single year, something that's very common. It's very regular for them. And all of a sudden, he breaks it, and he says, "This is my body broken for you. Every time you eat of this, you do this in remembrance of me." And we've talked about this before, but that word remembrance is the best way I can explain it. It's like taking a picture, the value of a picture. So when you take a picture, whether it's a physical picture or a picture on your phone, the value of that picture is not in the picture itself as a thing, right? The file or the actual physical picture. The value, the memory, is what that evokes when you look at it, when you see the picture and you remember the moment. It's almost like you feel like you get transported back into that moment, like a good picture, right? You remember the smells and the conversations that were happening, right? You remember just how you felt. That's what a picture does. That is the word in the original language that Jesus uses for the word remember. It's like this moment right now is being transported right here to remember this moment. So when we do this together, we are identifying with the disciples that are in that room, who are also identifying with the Exodus story of walking in the wilderness and out of Egypt. And Jesus says, in the midst of this, I'm breaking my body open for you, for all of you. So every time you do this, remember this. Take the picture, transport it back in this moment. Live like this is true. And then, actually, this text, this passage we read today, is the text where in the Passover Seder, there's 4 cups that are mentioned, and the 4 cups are mentioned in this text. But he lists up the 3rd cup, which is the cup of redemption. In fact, the verse, let me read the verse for it. It's, where you at? Here we go. Verse number 6. It says, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. That's the 3rd cup. He lifts up this cup to his disciple and he says, this is the blood of the new covenant for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Can you imagine what they're thinking in that moment? What are you talking about? What? For you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Every time you drink of this, you do this in remembrance of me. And we'll talk about Passover in this series later on. It's part of the Exodus story. But God is delivering them from their slavery, and he's going to shed his own blood to make sure that happens, to pave a way. That's the lengths that God will go to you, even if you don't believe him. Even if he sends people like Moses to tell you, and you're like, I don't know. God does that for you. So maybe this morning you need to ask God for a Moses. I don't know. Maybe you've had Moses just show up and you're just ignoring them right now. Maybe you just need to ask God, as you're coming today to take the bread and the cup this morning, maybe you need to take some time to ask God, hey, God, where are the Moseses in my life? Am I missing them? Is there anything that I'm getting in the way right now of listening to them? And maybe when you come, you just ask God, can you just clear these obstacles for me? Whatever it is in my way, can you clear them and help me see the Moseses that are already showing up? Maybe that's what you need to do, to let God fill you up. Or maybe this morning as you're coming, because this is not just a statement of who God is and what he's like. This isn't a statement of just forgiveness. This is also an invitation to live a particular way of life. Maybe you need to be a Moses to someone this week. And as you're coming forward and you're remembering what Jesus is doing, how he's breaking himself open and pouring himself out, standing in the gap to be a Moses, to call out the injustice, to call out the dignity in someone when other people aren't, to cast a vision of hope for their lives, of an identity that is so much better than they even believe about themselves. That's what Jesus is doing with this invitation. He's opening this pathway for them. Like, look, I'm opening this pathway to get rid of the stuff that has been weighing you down and destroying you and to give you new life. And I'm going to stand in the gap for you and take it. And he invites those who follow him to do the same. Maybe that's what you need to do this morning as you come. I don't know where it is you're at. Maybe it's a both and. Who knows? But I want to give you a minute to just reflect and ask God for that. What is it for you? Is it you need to listen to a Moses? Maybe it's you need to be a Moses. Take a minute and just ask God what that may be. What do you want me to do? And then when you feel ready, feel free to come and take out the elements, because all things are ready. I'm going to pray first, but feel free to come after you've asked God for that. So let me pray to lead us into that. God, I just ask this morning, I think of so many who are going through such hard times all around the world, God, who just need a dash of hope, who feel like the reality of the wilderness will never end. And God, you are constantly a God who says, I do not want to, you're not going to live in slavery forever. You don't have to. You can live differently. God, I pray that you help us to listen to the Moseses in our lives. Maybe we've been ignoring them a long time, or we open our ears and our eyes and our hearts to listen. Or God, I pray as maybe you've prompted us to also be Moseses to others, to come alongside them, to enter into their wilderness, to walk with them, to cast a vision of what God says about them, and to walk with them out of Egypt. God, I pray as we come to this table and remember your sacrifice for us, and this is the journey that we're talking about this whole this calendar season here, to recognize the lengths you'll go to tell us how much you love us, that you do not view us as slaves, but people that you love. And this is the lengths that you'll go. God, I pray that we also would live into this invitation as well, to be broken up and poured out for others, to be a type of Moses in other people's lives, one who calls out injustice, who calls out the dignity of all people, one who casts vision of a new identity and hope and points to you. Pray this in the name of Jesus, and everybody said, amen.